And I think it's an important thing for people to understand who are in local areas being told that there's nothing they can do about this, that they just have to accept these exposures. When legislators say we can't do anything locally, they point to two agencies and two organizations, and I want to talk about them because this is information that they have to bring back to their legislators and say, yes, there is something you can do about it. The first thing people need to understand is we have a captured captured regulatory system, and we have a failure to regulate. First of all, it starts with the FCC. Now, the FCC oversees the human exposure standard or guideline for wireless radiation. People need to understand, very importantly, the FCC is a captured agency. This isn't just my opinion. Harvard Ethics Department has done a report themselves, and it was called, FCC, Captured Agency. And I'll give you the exact title. They said how the FCC is dominated by the industries that is presumably regulating. This is important for people to understand. This is a captured agency. The chairman is a former Verizon attorney. One of the newly elected commissioners, Commissioner Carr, used to work for a law firm that defended AT&T, Verizon, and CTIA from lawsuits. So most definitely the fox is guarding the hen house here, and that we're asking basically the wireless industry to regulate itself by putting the FCC in charge. The other thing that's very important for you to understand, you can go to the FCC website and see this, and I'll read it as a quote. At the present time, there is no federally mandated radio frequency exposure standard. People need to understand that there is no safety standard for wireless radiation. We have a safety guideline that is based on the recommendations from 4 non-government organizations that are highly dominated by the industry, that hold on to a long outdated safety guideline that only focuses on thermal exposures and actual acute burning for short-term exposures, not long-term exposures. So people need to understand that. Secondly, when the FCC is pressed on health and safety issues, and they are getting pressed on them now, they say, well, we take advisement from the FDA. Important to understand about the FDA. They do not have primary responsibility for these exposures. The FCC does. They're in an advisory role. That makes a huge difference. The other thing you need to understand is the FDA has done research in collaboration with CTIA, the wireless lobby and trade organization, showing how conflicted and captured even the FDA is. And you can look this up on their website. Look under CRADA, C-R-A-D-A, Cooperative Research and Development Agreement. Okay, this is where they explain that they've made an agreement with CTIA, and they did research regarding the mechanistic studies and how this damages DNA, and in terms of their exposure assessment studies. So the most important studies in terms of this issue were done in collaboration with CTIA. So when the FDA says that this is a safe technology, first of all, they're not doing any safety testing, and that's important to understand. And the studies they've done have been in collaboration with CTIA, and we shouldn't be surprised that they didn't come up with any concerning findings. But let me read you off the FDA's website, because this is important. Quote, under the law, FDA does not review the safety of radiation-emitting consumer products, such as cell phones and similar wireless devices, before they can be sold, as it does with new drugs or medical devices. So this is in their own words. So when they say this is safe, I don't know what they're basing it on, because they don't do safety testing. The next thing to understand is oftentimes people point to the FCC, then the FDA points to, the FCC points to the FDA, and then they say, well, the American Cancer Society says this is fine and there's not much to be concerned about. Let's talk about the American Cancer Society. First of all, it's not a research organization. It's an organization designed to take in funding to provide to people who have cancer to help provide support. And what's very important for you to understand is AT&T is one of the corporate partners of American Cancer Society. You also need to understand they have a global council which advises them globally, and there's 10 CEOs in this global council. 3 of them are wireless related. Motorola is one of their global CEO advisors. Also keep in mind that their executives, some of them come directly from the wireless industry. For instance, Wayne White, who's one of their executive vice presidents, used to work for AT&T, Verizon, Motorola, Octel Mobile, and General Electric. They basically work for every wireless company you could work for. So when the industry points to the American Cancer Society and saying there's no problem, they are basically pointing back to themselves. This is important for you to know because they will throw this out, whether it's legislators locally, or if it's the industry themselves, or it's media people who don't want to cover this issue. You need to be able to come back and say, these are highly captured, compromised organizations and agencies, and you need to look at the evidence. You need to know that people are getting sick from this. The next organization they point to is the World Health Organization. And this is pretty fantastic, actually, because the World Health Organization already classified wireless as a possible carcinogen in 2011. And what's interesting about this is since then, we've got enough scientific evidence that scientists believe and can clearly argue that we have enough evidence for a class 1 human carcinogen classification. Why is that important? Because if you classify it as a class 1 carcinogen, like cigarette smoke and lead, then you need to warn people about the harm and you need to minimize exposure, not maximize it as we're doing now. Important to understand is the World Health Organization, instead of listening to its own collaborative organization, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which classified it as a class 2B carcinogen, they are referring to ICNR, which is a group self-appointed from industry that is holding on to this outdated idea that there are only heating effects and there are only acute burning effects, that anything below or before heating isn't an issue. So this is very important for you to know. And if you want to know more about this, you can look it up. Anthony Miller, who is a long time, he's a medical doctor, research scientist, has been a long-time advisor for the World Health Organization, more than 10 years. He recently wrote a paper arguing the class 1 human carcinogen classification and providing the evidence to support it. And you can find this just by Googling his name, Anthony Miller ResearchGate. The other scientist that has come out very clearly in saying this is a class 1 carcinogen is Leonard Hardell. And you can find his work and his paper arguing for class 1 carcinogen at Leonard Hardell ResearchGate also. He is an MD and a PhD, but what really defines and differentiates Dr. Hardell is he's done the most research, and at last time we counted it, 80 different studies looking at brain cancer and cell phone radiation specifically. So in this area, we have to believe he is the preeminent authority. He's arguing class 1 carcinogen, and you can find him at Leonard Hardell ResearchGate for more information there. He also wrote a paper, and I encourage you to look it up, and I'm going to quote it really specifically, World Health Organization, Radiofrequency Radiation and Health, a hard nut to crack, where he basically explains how the World Health Organization has formed a subgroup called the EMF Project that is made up of scientists that the industry uses to defend them from lawsuits in going through and systematically dismissing the latest evidence and holding on to this class 1 and to denying this class 1 classification or an increase to class 2B, which would be a probable carcinogen. And he kind of explains what's happening at the World Health Organization and how they've been compromised. He personally went with a group of scientists to talk with the World Health Organization that weren't open to it. But understand this about the World Health Organization. 2/3 of their funding now comes from outside sources. And we have the documentation to show that. And behind the United States, the second largest funder is the Gates Foundation, from Microsoft founder, Bill Gates. We also found in the year that we looked, which was 2015, that the Telecommunication Workers Union donated $800,000, and that Cisco donated another $275,000. So again, when the industry points back to the World Health Organization, they're pointing back to a captured agency. They might as well be pointing back to themselves because they're ignoring their own collaborative group, which is the International Agency for Research on Cancer, through the World Health Organization, and deferring to an industry-controlled group, which is ICNR. So people need to understand this and come into meetings armed with this information to keep legislators from just denying this concern about health effects and from insisting that they do something. But the bottom line is this: there is no safety testing for wireless radiation.